It was a warm summer afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood. A group of black children were outside, enjoying their time playing together. They were running around, laughing and having fun as kids should. The sun was shining brightly, and the air was filled with the sounds of their innocent joy. They played games like tag, kickball, and made up fun challenges, unaware that a problem was brewing nearby. One of the neighbors, Mr. Thompson, was sitting in his house across the street. He was known to be a grumpy and difficult person, and over the years, he'd shown signs of being very judgmental toward people who were different from him. As he watched the kids play, his irritation grew. He didn't like the noise, and he didn't like seeing black children enjoying themselves right outside his window. To him, the kids' carefree laughter felt out of place in his quiet neighborhood. Frustrated by what he saw, Mr. Thompson decided to take action. He picked up the phone and dialed the local police department. His voice was stern as he described the scene, making it seem like the children were causing trouble when in reality, they were just playing. He told the dispatcher that there were unruly kids outside, as if their presence was a problem. He hoped the police would show up and make the kids leave. The dispatcher listened and assured him that officers would be sent to the scene. Meanwhile, the children were still laughing, unaware of the trouble they were about to face. They didn't know that the simple act of playing in front of someone's house would lead to a visit from the police. They were simply enjoying their summer day, something any child should be able to do without fear or judgment. Not long after the call, a police car pulled up in front of the house. The kids froze for a moment, unsure of what was happening. They had never been in trouble, and this was a strange and unexpected situation. The officers stepped out of the car and started talking to the children, asking questions about what they were doing. The kids didn't know how to respond, as they hadn't done anything wrong. They were just trying to have fun. As the officers spoke with the children, something important was about to unfold. A new chapter was about to begin in the neighborhood. The man who had called the police, Mr. Thompson, didn't know that the situation was about to take a surprising turn. This wasn't just any father. The police chief of the department, the very person in charge of handling this situation, was the father of one of the kids. The story now shifts to the father of one of the children, a man named Marcus. Marcus had always been a quiet, hard-working person, deeply committed to his family and his job. He had grown up in the same neighborhood as the children, but his journey in life had been anything but ordinary. Over the years, he had faced countless challenges, especially due to the color of his skin. Growing up, he knew what it felt like to be looked down upon or treated unfairly simply because of his race. It was something that made him determined to prove that he could overcome whatever obstacles were thrown his way. Despite the many hurdles, Marcus had always believed in hard work and perseverance. He believed that if you kept pushing forward, no matter how difficult the road was, things could change. He poured his energy into building a career in law enforcement, joining the police force when he was old enough. At first, it wasn't easy. There were moments when he felt like people doubted him because of his background, but Marcus refused to let that stop him. He proved himself time and time again, gaining the trust of his fellow officers and the community. Over the years, Marcus worked his way up the ranks, each step coming with new challenges, but also new opportunities to make a difference. People who once doubted him started to recognize his talent and his commitment to justice. As he moved up, his goal was always the same: to help make the community safer for everyone, no matter their race, background, or where they came from. He was determined to show people that things could change, that it was possible to create a police force that truly served and protected every person equally. Finally, after years of hard work and dedication, Marcus received the call he had worked so hard for. He was promoted to the position of police chief, the highest-ranking officer in the department. The position meant a great deal to him, not just because of the authority it came with, but because it meant he could now make real changes to the system. It was a position of power, but it also came with the responsibility to lead with fairness and integrity. The day Marcus received the news that he had been promoted to police chief, he felt a rush of emotions. There was pride, of course, but also a heavy sense of responsibility. He was no longer just an officer. He was now the leader of the entire department. The weight of the badge on his chest felt different now. It was a symbol of all the work he had put in, but also a reminder of the enormous changes he wanted to bring about. As he walked through the police station that morning, his colleagues greeted him with respect, some offering congratulations, while others simply gave him knowing nods. Marcus understood their silent acknowledgement. It was a shared recognition of the journey he had taken to reach this point. As the new police chief, Marcus knew he would have to prove himself not just to his fellow officers, but to the community as well. He had always believed that a police force should be a reflection of the people it serves. Too often, law enforcement had been seen as an outsider, something separate from the communities it was meant to protect. Marcus wanted to change that. He wanted to make sure that everyone, no matter their race, background, or history, felt like the police were there for them. In the days following his promotion, Marcus started making plans. He met with various community leaders, talked to citizens, and asked them about their concerns. What he heard wasn't surprising. People felt disconnected from the police. They didn't trust them, and many felt that the officers didn't understand their struggles. Marcus made it his mission to change that. He focused on rebuilding the relationship between the police department and the people they served. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be bumps along the way, but he was ready. The first big test of his leadership came sooner than he expected. A situation involving a group of kids playing outside had escalated in a way no one had anticipated. The kids, including his own children, had simply been having fun, but the neighbor, Mr. Thompson, had called the police on them, claiming they were causing trouble. Marcus wasn't aware of the call until he arrived at the scene, but the moment he saw his own kids standing in front of the officers, he knew things had already started to unfold in a way that was troubling. As he approached the officers, he recognized the look on their faces. They were doing their jobs, following protocol, but Marcus could see that something wasn't right. The officers were speaking to the children as if they had done something wrong, when in reality they hadn't. The situation was becoming tense, and Marcus knew he had to step in before it escalated further. He took a deep breath and walked over, ready to handle this the way he had handled many challenges in the past, with calm, understanding, and authority. What he didn't expect was that the tension would not only be about the children's behavior, but about something much deeper. The moment he stepped forward and revealed his identity as the new police chief, the atmosphere changed. The officers, who had no idea who he was at that moment, looked at him with surprise. And the neighbor, Mr. Thompson, stood there, still seething with frustration, completely unaware that the very man he had called on was now standing right before him. The situation had just taken a turn, and Marcus knew that he had a chance to make a statement. But how would he handle this? Would he be able to show Mr. Thompson that there was a better way to handle misunderstandings, especially when it came to something as simple as children playing outside? Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest, but his face calm and composed. He could feel the eyes of the officers on him as he walked up to them. They didn't know who he was yet, but that was about to change. He glanced at his children, standing quietly in front of the officers, their faces filled with confusion and uncertainty. They had no idea why the police were even there. They had only been playing, like any other group of kids would on a warm afternoon. The officers didn't seem to notice his approach at first. They were focused on the children, questioning them about their activities. Marcus could tell they weren't being harsh, but there was a sense of authority in their voices that didn't belong in a situation like this. It was as if they were treating a harmless game as a serious issue. His kids hadn't done anything wrong, but the officers were still speaking to them as if they were potential troublemakers. Without saying a word, Marcus walked up behind one of the officers and tapped him lightly on the shoulder. The officer turned around and froze for a moment, his eyes widening as he recognized the man standing before him. It was Marcus, the newly appointed police chief. The officer quickly straightened up, his surprise evident, but he said nothing. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but firm. His tone wasn't one of anger, but more of confusion, as if he couldn't understand why this situation had even escalated to this point. The officer cleared his throat before responding. "Chief," he said, a bit nervously, "we got a call about these kids causing a disturbance. We were just trying to figure out what's going on here." Marcus looked around at the kids. They were still standing there, some shifting uncomfortably, others just staring at the ground. They looked completely innocent. He could feel his frustration growing, but he kept his voice steady. "I don't see a disturbance," he said slowly. "All I see are kids playing outside, having fun. They're not doing anything wrong. They're just being kids." At that moment, Marcus turned to face Mr. Thompson, who was standing off to the side, still watching the scene unfold. The anger in his eyes was clear, but there was also a sense of confusion. He had expected the police to handle this situation quickly, to make the kids leave, or at least stop them from making noise. But now, it was clear that things weren't going according to his plan. "Mr. Thompson," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority, "I understand you called the police about these children. But I need to ask you something. Do you really believe they're doing something that requires us to step in? Are we really going to treat kids playing in the street like they're committing a crime?" Mr. Thompson opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come out at first. He clearly hadn't expected this kind of response from the new police chief. Marcus's question wasn't confrontational. It was simply a challenge to Mr. Thompson's way of thinking. It was clear that the older man was uncomfortable now, as if he hadn't expected his call to be met with this much scrutiny. Marcus's words hung in the air for a moment. The silence was thick, but the tension was starting to lift. The officers, too, seemed unsure of how to respond. For a moment, Marcus thought Mr. Thompson might back down, but instead, the neighbor's face turned red with frustration. "These kids," Mr. Thompson began, his voice trembling slightly, "they don't belong here. They're making too much noise, causing a mess. This neighborhood isn't meant for this kind of behavior." Marcus could see that Mr. Thompson's frustration wasn't really about the noise at all. It was something deeper, something that had been brewing for years. The neighbor wasn't just upset about the children's play. It was about their very presence, about seeing kids who didn't look like him enjoying life in the same space he had claimed as his own. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stepped closer to Mr. Thompson, his voice even softer now. "Everyone deserves to feel safe and welcome in this neighborhood, Mr. Thompson. These kids, my kids, they deserve the same right to enjoy their day as anyone else." The air was still for a moment as Marcus's words settled in. Mr. Thompson opened his mouth again, but this time, he didn't speak. Instead, he stood there, his anger slowly giving way to an uncomfortable silence. The power of Marcus's calm authority and clear message had struck a chord. It was a moment of reflection for everyone present, an opportunity for growth, even in the midst of tension. Finally, after a long pause, Mr. Thompson shifted on his feet, his anger still there but now tempered by uncertainty. He muttered something under his breath, but it wasn't loud enough for anyone to hear. Marcus didn't respond to the comment. Instead, he turned back to the children, offering them a reassuring smile. "Go on and play," Marcus said gently. "You're not causing any problems." The children, relieved to be free from the uncomfortable situation, broke into smiles and ran back to their game, their laughter filling the air once more. Marcus watched them for a moment, feeling proud of his children and hopeful for the future of the neighborhood. As for Mr. Thompson, it was clear that today's events had made him question some of his assumptions. Whether he would change or not was unclear, but Marcus had made his point. The children were not the problem. The problem was the fear and prejudice that people like Mr. Thompson still carried. And Marcus, as the new police chief, was determined to be a part of changing that. The atmosphere around Marcus shifted after that confrontation. While Mr. Thompson didn't apologize, and the tension between them remained, Marcus had managed to diffuse a potentially volatile situation without raising his voice or allowing things to escalate. He stood there for a moment, watching the kids as they resumed their game, their carefree laughter filling the air again. It was a small victory, but it meant everything to him. As the scene started to calm down, Marcus turned to the officers who had been present, still processing what had just happened. They had witnessed firsthand how their new chief handled the situation. There was a quiet respect in their eyes, a recognition of the steady leadership that Marcus had shown. He hadn't just stood up for his children. He had also stood up for the community, for the people who sometimes felt overlooked or misunderstood. "Let's make sure we check in with the community more," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm. "The goal is not to look for trouble, but to prevent it before it even begins. If we want to rebuild trust with the people we serve, it starts by listening to them and understanding their needs." The officers nodded in agreement, a few even exchanging looks with each other. They knew that Marcus's leadership style was different from what they were used to. He didn't lead with fear or intimidation. He led with understanding, and most importantly, with empathy. It was clear that his approach wasn't going to be like the old ways of doing things. He wasn't interested in power for power's sake. He was interested in using his position to bring real, lasting change to the community. After the officers left, Marcus remained standing there for a moment, still processing what had just occurred. He was proud of how he had handled the situation, but he also knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges, more misunderstandings, and more people who needed to be shown that the police could be a force for good, not just authority. Marcus was also aware that the community had a long history of distrust in law enforcement, and breaking down those barriers wouldn't happen overnight. It would take time, and it would take patience, but he was ready for that. He knew that being a police chief wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about building relationships and creating a safer, more united community where everyone felt valued. Later that evening, Marcus sat down with his family for dinner. His children, still excited from their afternoon, chattered away about their day. They were too young to fully understand the significance of what had happened, but Marcus couldn't help but smile as he listened to their innocent conversations. For them, it was just another day of playing outside, without realizing that they had been at the center of a larger issue. His wife, Lisa, glanced at him across the table, sensing the weight on his shoulders. She could see the tiredness in his eyes, the toll that the responsibility was already taking on him. But she also saw the determination. Marcus had worked his entire life to get to this point, and now that he was here, he wasn't going to back down. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You did good today," she said softly, her eyes full of support. Marcus gave her a tired smile, grateful for her understanding. "It's just the beginning," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm ready for whatever comes next." As he sat back in his chair, the weight of his role as police chief started to feel even heavier. But there was also a sense of hope that came with it. Marcus knew he wasn't just fighting for his family, or even for his own career. He was fighting for a better future for the entire community, for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly or dismissed. He was fighting for change, and he wouldn't stop until he saw it. In the days that followed, Marcus began to implement small but significant changes within the department. He focused on training officers to understand the communities they serve better, to approach each situation with compassion rather than judgment. He encouraged open communication with citizens, creating a platform for them to share their concerns and experiences. Slowly but surely, he could see the department beginning to change. But he also knew that some people would resist. There were those in the community who wouldn't accept the changes, who were set in their ways. He had already seen it in Mr. Thompson's reaction. But Marcus wasn't deterred. He had been through challenges before, and he understood that change wasn't always easy. It was hard, it was uncomfortable, and it often made people angry, but it was necessary. and he was willing to do whatever it took to make sure that the future was one where everyone, no matter who they were, felt heard, respected, and safe. The work ahead would be difficult, but Marcus was determined. With each step, he knew he was getting closer to the kind of community he envisioned, a community where people could play outside, laugh together, and live without fear, no matter their background. And that thought kept him going, even on the toughest days. As the days passed, Marcus continued to reflect on the events that had unfolded. The call that brought the police to his children, the way things had been handled, and the uncomfortable tension with Mr. Thompson. It had all left a mark on him. But it also motivated him. It became clear to Marcus that his role as police chief was more than just a position of authority. It was an opportunity to create real change, to break down old barriers and misconceptions. He knew that true progress would take time, but he was ready to put in the work. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, community outreach programs, and working closely with his officers. Marcus was determined to set a new tone within the police department, one that focused on understanding and building trust with the people they were supposed to serve. It wasn't just about enforcing the law. It was about creating relationships with the community and ensuring everyone felt safe and heard. One evening, Marcus was at the local community center, speaking with a group of residents. The room was full of people, some eager to share their thoughts and others hesitant, unsure of how much change could really happen. Marcus stood at the front, listening intently as people spoke about their concerns. Some shared stories about unfair treatment they had experienced in the past, while others expressed hope for a future where the police were seen as allies instead of figures of authority to fear. "I don't know if things will ever change," one woman said, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. "I've lived here all my life, and I've seen what happens when the police come into our neighborhoods. It's never good." Marcus nodded, acknowledging the weight of her words. He knew that the mistrust in the community ran deep, and he couldn't just wave it away with a few kind words. Change required action, and he was ready to take that on. "I understand," Marcus said gently, making sure to meet her eyes. "It won't be easy, but I promise you that I am committed to doing things differently. I'm not here to impose fear. I'm here to listen, to work with you, and to make sure that our officers are part of the community, not apart from it." The room fell silent for a moment as his words settled in. It wasn't a magical solution, but it was a start. People began to speak more openly, asking questions and offering suggestions. The atmosphere had shifted from one of uncertainty to one of cautious hope. Marcus had made it clear that his goal wasn't to change everything overnight, but to build something lasting, something that everyone could be a part of. At the same time, Marcus continued to work within the police department. He knew that making changes within the community would only work if his officers were on board as well. He had a few tough conversations with officers who were resistant to the idea of change, but over time, even they began to see the value in what he was trying to accomplish. They realized that the old ways weren't working anymore. People were looking for more than just enforcement. They were looking for understanding and empathy. One of the first officers to come around was Officer Davis. He had been with the department for years and had always believed in the tough-on-crime approach. He was skeptical of Marcus's more community-focused methods at first, unsure how they would work in practice. But after seeing Marcus in action, handling situations with patience, listening to residents, and prioritizing de-escalation, Officer Davis started to change his mind. One afternoon, Marcus was walking through the neighborhood with Officer Davis when they saw a group of young people standing on the corner. The kids were loud, laughing, and having fun, but their presence was making a few of the nearby residents uneasy. Marcus could see Officer Davis tense up, ready to take control of the situation. But Marcus raised his hand, signaling for him to wait. "Let me handle this," Marcus said quietly. He walked up to the group of kids, giving them a friendly nod. "Hey, everyone, how's it going?" he asked, his tone warm and inviting. The kids looked up at him, unsure at first, but when they saw the friendly smile on his face, they relaxed. "We're just hanging out, officer," one of the boys said, his voice cautious but not scared. Marcus smiled and nodded. "I get it. Just make sure you're not blocking the sidewalk too much, all right? People need to be able to pass through. But other than that, I'm good with you all having fun." The kids looked at each other and then back at Marcus, surprised by his approach. They hadn't expected to be treated like they weren't a problem. They quickly agreed and moved to one side of the sidewalk, allowing people to pass by without issue. As Marcus walked back to Officer Davis, he could see the look of realization on his face. Officer Davis had been expecting a confrontation, but Marcus had shown him another way. There didn't need to be force. Sometimes, all it took was a calm approach and treating people with respect. "You handled that well," Officer Davis said quietly, as they walked away. Marcus nodded. "We all have to do better. It's not about controlling people, it's about understanding them." That evening, as Marcus sat with his family again, he felt a sense of pride in what he had accomplished so far. There was still a long road ahead, but he was beginning to see real change. People were starting to feel like they had a voice, like they mattered. And that was the kind of police chief Marcus wanted to be, the kind who was there for his community, not just for the job. The kind who would make sure that his children, and every child in the neighborhood, could grow up knowing that they were safe, valued, and heard. Weeks went by, and Marcus found himself settling more and more into his role as police chief. It wasn't easy, but he was beginning to see the change he had hoped for. The community's trust in the police was slowly growing, and the atmosphere in the department was changing as well. The officers who had been resistant at first were now starting to understand the importance of connecting with the people they served. They were seeing firsthand how effective empathy and patience could be, and it was working. One day, Marcus was sitting in his office when he got a call that made his heart race. It was from the local high school. Apparently, a fight had broken out near the school grounds, and a large group of students had gathered. The situation sounded like it could escalate quickly, and Marcus knew this was the kind of test he had been preparing for. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket and headed out, his mind already focused on how he could handle this differently. As he arrived at the school, he saw the chaos unfolding. There were kids shouting, some were arguing, and others seemed ready to get physical. Marcus could feel the tension in the air. He could see a few officers already trying to step in, but the crowd was getting bigger, and the situation was far from calm. Marcus stepped forward, raising a hand to signal the officers to hold back. He wasn't going to rush in with force. Instead, he approached the group of students, taking slow, deliberate steps. He didn't want to intimidate them. He wanted to show that he was there to listen, not to punish. "Hey, everyone, let's take a step back," Marcus said in a calm voice, his eyes scanning the crowd for anyone who looked like they were in danger or ready to fight. "I know things are heated right now, but this isn't the way to handle it. I'm here to help. What's going on?" For a moment, there was silence. The students were looking at each other, unsure of how to respond. Marcus could see the anger in their eyes, but he also saw fear. Fear of being punished, of getting caught in the system, of feeling misunderstood. One of the students, a tall girl with her arms crossed, stepped forward. "You don't know what it's like," she said, her voice shaking with frustration. "The teachers don't care about us. The cops always treat us like we're criminals just because of where we live. We're just tired of it." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression serious but not stern. "I hear you," he said. "I know it feels like the world's against you sometimes, but that's why I'm here. I want to understand why you feel this way, and I want to help fix it. Let's talk about it." The girl hesitated, but then something in her softened. She looked around at the other students, some of whom were still watching Marcus cautiously. Slowly, she began to speak, and others joined in. One by one, the kids opened up about their frustrations, the unfair treatment they felt they faced daily, the lack of support they got from school officials, and the feelings of being forgotten. Marcus listened carefully to each person, never interrupting, never trying to fix things immediately. He just listened, and as he did, he could see the anger begin to dissipate, replaced with a sense of being heard. These students had felt invisible for so long, but now someone was finally paying attention to them. After a while, Marcus addressed the crowd. "I'm not saying things are perfect, or that I can change everything overnight, but I can promise you this. What's happening here right now is a step in the right direction. We're going to keep talking, we're going to keep working together, and we're going to make this better. But I need your help too." The students stood in silence for a moment, processing what he had said. Then, one by one, they began to disperse, returning to class or going home. The situation had calmed down, but Marcus knew the work wasn't done. This was just one moment in a long journey, and he couldn't stop now. As he walked back to his car, Marcus took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. He had faced his biggest test yet, and he had come through it. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and there was still a lot of work to do, but Marcus knew that today had been a victory. It wasn't about winning the argument or punishing the kids who had been involved. It was about showing them that they mattered, that their voices were important. It was about proving to them that not all police were the enemy, and that the system could work for them if they gave it a chance. Later that evening, Marcus sat with his family, reflecting on the day. His children were laughing and talking, completely unaware of the challenges their father had faced that day. But Marcus smiled, knowing that the work he was doing wasn't just for himself or for the department, it was for them too. It was for a future where they could grow up feeling safe, respected, and valued, no matter their background. And as he watched them, Marcus knew that his journey was far from over. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but he was ready for whatever came next. He was determined to keep pushing forward, to keep listening, and to keep working toward a better future for his community. After all, change didn't come overnight, but with each step, he was getting closer to making that change a reality.